Thank you, Christopher Kaufman Ilstrup, for being here today at CCTV to talk a little bit about all things humanities and specifically Vermont Humanities. You're the executive director of the Vermont Humanities organization. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about you and who you are.
Sure, yeah. Well, Vermont Humanities has been around since 1974, so this is our 51st year doing public humanities work in the state of Vermont, which means that what we do is all the work of humans being in space with one another to talk about really what it means to be a good human, a good citizen, a good community member, working together for the betterment of our state and of people's local towns. We do a lot of different things. Many people know about us through our Vermont Reads program, where we pick one book a year and encourage communities around the state to read that book together and do community organizing projects around the book. Books that we've done in the past have been books like Bread and Roses 2 by Catherine Patterson, a pretty renowned author who happens to live in Montpelier. We also did John Lewis, Andrew Iden, and Nate Powell's book, March, which is the biography of John Lewis about the civil rights movement.
That was a graphic novel
That was a graphic novel interpretation of John Lewis's history as one of the youngest organizers in the civil rights movement. Last year's book was Gather by Ken Cadow, who happens to be the principal at Oxbow High School in the Upper Valley, a book about a young kid whose mom is struggling with addiction. That was our most popular book ever. We gave away 9,000 copies.
You gave away 9,000 copies. Talk to me a little bit about the impact of just that Vermont Reads program. Again, you say that's how people get involved often in humanities.
Yeah, that's one of the more public ways that people get involved with us. We're also a funder ourselves, so we make grants out to local community projects that might be doing public humanities work. We also do training for teachers, especially early literacy teachers and librarians around the state. But to go back to Vermont Reads, when people are doing a Vermont Reads project, they can ask us for up to 75 copies of the book to distribute in their community. But it's not just a book club. You can't just read the book and talk about it. You have to do a project. So for example, a few years ago when we did a book called El Viaje Más Caro, The Most Costly Journey, about migrant farm workers in Vermont. One of the projects that was organized was a soccer tournament to engage people from the migrant farm worker community who are very into soccer with local kids playing soccer and to build sort of community cross-cultural understanding. And there was a lot of music projects that year to bring Mexican music into Vermont. And many people said to us after that project that they never really knew their migrant farm worker neighbors until they started reading that book and doing those projects. And so that's really one of the goals, is to help build understanding sort of neighbor to neighbor. With the Gather project about the young boy whose mom was struggling with addiction, we saw a lot of similar awareness building, right? That people frequently said, I didn't know that my neighbors were struggling with addiction, with recovery issues. I didn't know how to support kids whose families might be in that space. And now I do, because I read that book.
And what are some of the programs, what are some of the projects that happened around that book? Just a fun fact, we have those soccer tournaments in the CCTV archives as well, which I think of as like a huge humanities holding, is this 40-year archive of content, community discussions, expressions of our relationships with one another through cultural and political events.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, organizations like CCTV and the other public access stations have been a huge part of our history, right? That so much of what we have done has been distributed through public access, through whether it's CCTV or Orca or Northeast Kingdom Television or Rutland. These talks, community events have often been recorded for posterity and broadcast in the moment to reach a wider audience. So that's been great. With Gather, it was, of course, a pretty intense experience for many people to kind of learn more about what it is like to live with somebody who's struggling with addiction. And so there were a lot of sort of difficult community conversations about that. But another piece of Gather is really the resilience that Ian shows as a young person whose mom is struggling, and how he works to protect his mom, and how he works to protect his family. And also the central metaphor, gather, of how we as a community gather around each other in times of trouble. And we really saw that in that book, that it was a real opportunity for teachers to talk about how they care about their students, for folks from all walks of life to talk about how we all gather around in community to support people who are struggling. Another great thing about that book is that Ian adopts a dog who he names Gather early on in the book. And the dog has been homeless. He just kind of wanders onto Ian's farm and stays. And so many community projects during our year with Gather revolved around the importance of people's animals in their lives and what kind of support animals can offer. Especially to young people.
Yeah. I mean, you've been doing this work. You've been executive director for about 10 years. Is that right?
Just past my 7th year.
Just past your 7th year.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So not quite 10, but we're getting close.
I'm adding some days onto your time. What drew you to this? How did you come to the humanities?
Yeah. Well, I've been a community organizer for a really long time. I came into community organizing with a strong interest in the humanities. I went to Virgins High School. I won the Humanities Prize back in 1986. And so that kind of makes me laugh a little bit.
What was your project? Do you remember?
I don't. I think it was just kind of the overall nerdiest humanities kid got the prize. I don't know if it was a specific project or not. But, I like to say that my life has been divided up into a bunch of chunks, right? That in the 90s, I did a lot of community organizing around environmental and economic justice. And that's when we first knew each other 30 plus years ago now. I then worked in LGBT organizing for quite a while. I was the first employee at what is now the Pride Center, what was then RU12. I worked at Outright. And then I moved into philanthropy and I worked at Vermont Community Foundation. And part of my role at Vermont Community Foundation was to be the grant maker responsible for arts and culture and humanities grant making. And so I really started to get to know those players during that time. So when this opportunity came up, it felt like a great next step for me. And it's been an awesome 7 years, in part because I keep getting to learn new things, and we do pick a new book every year, and we get to develop new partnerships with new organizations every year, and that's a lot of fun. And we've been able to grow our budget so that our grant making is much stronger than it was when I started. This year we expect to be giving away somewhere in the neighborhood of probably $350,000 in small grants to organizations around the state to do humanities projects. And that's been really amazing to be able to grow the resources available for grassroots community projects.
Now, and one of the things about humanities, in Vermont Humanities, you're covering the whole state. And we think of Vermont as a small state, but it's very diverse. It's a very diverse state, economically, geographically. What is that experience like? And talk about some of those partnerships that you've developed around the state, maybe highlighting some of the variation.
Yeah, we do try and work throughout the state. It's been very important to me and to our volunteer board of directors that we have representation from all parts of the state. We just had our board retreat up in Newport in the Northeast Kingdom, in part because we brought a traveling Smithsonian exhibit to Newport, and this is the closing stop on its tour. So we wanted our board to be able to see what that looks like and what Newport looks like.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, sure.
Take a detour. Tell us about this traveling exhibit. And is this something that you do regularly as part of humanities?
This was our first try, which has been really a little bit weird for the folks at the Smithsonian because Vermont's usually not last, but Vermont and New Hampshire were states number 49 and 50
Wow.
to host a Smithsonian Museum on Main Street exhibit. And so they're very happy to tick us off the list. The particular exhibit we got is called Crossroads, and it's about change in rural America. And all of the Museum on Main Street exhibits are about rural communities on some level. This one I think was particularly resonant for Vermont and New Hampshire because we have experienced so much change over the last 20 or 30 years, especially with the decline of the agricultural sector and the sort of pressures to kind of suburbanize in rural states. And so each host venue, always in a small community, it would never come to Burlington. Burlington's considered too big for a museum on Main Street. Develops their own exhibit that wraps around the Smithsonian exhibit. And in this case in Newport, you can go and you can see this wonderful photography exhibit about Orleans County and all of the different changes that have happened there over the last, some of those photographs go back 100 years, and it's interesting to see what has changed and what has stayed the same. But one of the real points of that exhibit is that we tend to make the assumption that rural America is static, that it doesn't change, that it's very conservative, not necessarily politically conservative, but that it's things are always the same there. It's always some sort of version of the 1950s in rural America. And the point of the exhibit is to show that change is constant in all communities, not just urban spaces.
And Newport certainly has had a lot of change. And is that exhibit still up for a little while for folks?
Yeah, it'll be up through the end of the month, so about 2 more weeks.
Okay.
And then starting next year, we'll have a new one coming up. I believe it will start in June. And I don't think I'm quite allowed to say where it's going yet.
Okay, so keep your eyes
but
posted.
keep your eyes peeled for next
There's
year.
a website, the VermontHumanities.org.
VermontHumanities.org, you'll be able to find it. But if you're going up to Newport, Northeast Kingdom Tasting Center, right on Main Street is where it's located for another couple weeks.
You're having a board meeting there to sort of draw yourself out of big population centers, and you're telling us about other partnerships that you're doing.
So wonderful to be partnering with organizations like the Orleans County Historical Society, which hosted Crossroads. Right, we have a lot of relationships with small historical societies and museums, often run without any paid staff.
Correct.
We do a lot of work with libraries all over the state, probably over 100 libraries in the course of any given year. Most of them are very, very small organizations typically with very small budgets. So one of the things that we can do is provide a small amount of resources that will go a long way towards being able to train a children's librarian on pedagogy and curriculum for working with young people, to provide a modest amount of resources to purchase books for their collection that they wouldn't otherwise have, to provide grants or subsidies for bringing scholars in to a community to talk about the history of that community. Right now we're offering a lot of talks about climate change in Vermont and nationally, because our Vermont Reads book this year is a book about the climate crisis. And those talks have been, as you might imagine, really popular because people are very front and center now about the impacts of climate change on their towns. And so that is something that doesn't just affect bigger cities like Burlington or South Burlington, but is very, very present for places like Johnson and Lyndonville, and of course my town, Montpelier, just a couple of years ago. Right.
Yeah, temperature changes, impacts.
So we have a talk right now that's about, why are Vermont towns always built in the floodplains next to the rivers? And to help people have that conversation about the history of why that is and what we
You
might
say-
need to think about going forward.
When you say we have a talk, who is doing that talk? And is that humanities staff? Is it somebody that you've brought in?
Sure, yeah. We have affiliated scholars from lots of different institutions.
Yep.
Sometimes they're even independent or they're retired.
Yep.
But people from UVM, from Middlebury, from CCV, from Johnson, sometimes people from outside of the state as well that are part of our Speakers Bureau.
Yep.
They present an idea for us on a talk they want to give. We will often throw out, hey, we want talks on this theme coming up. We want talks on climate change and the humanities coming up. What do you got? And people will send us their ideas. We book them in. And then any nonprofit in Vermont can say, hey, I want that talk about river communities and climate change. They'll call up that scholar, they'll agree on a date, and then we pay the scholar fee.
Great.
So that the small library, the small historical society doesn't have to take on that cost, but they can provide a high quality program.
Yeah. And some of those are recorded, and you can watch them on community media access channels
Yeah.
around the state.
Frequently,
Yeah.
and actually this is good timing to talk about our fall festival is coming up. There'll be 10 different events during National Arts and Humanities Month, which is October, and a bunch of them are going to be live streamed.
Great.
So you'll be able to watch them on our website.
Tell us a little bit more about the fall festival. What happens?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a different theme every year. It's usually related to our Vermont Reads book. This year's theme is Resilient Patterns. And for example, we're having Martha Barnett from the podcast Away with Words, which airs on Vermont Public, come and talk about the way that words are used to talk about climate change, which gets complicated in today's world where climate change has become a particularly politicized topic. So we're looking forward to having Martha and her co-host at the South Burlington Library in the middle of the month. There'll be Judy Carrick Dalton, who is an environmental writer. Sundog Poetry Center is organizing a whole day-long symposium about environmental poetry. There's going to be things from all the way down in Bellows Falls, all the way up to the North Country. And people should definitely come. I think maybe the highlight for a lot of people is going to be Ada Limon, the former U.S. Poet Laureate, who's going to close us out at UVM towards the end of the month.
Great. Vermont Humanities is part of a network of other humanities, if that's the right way to put it, around the state. You're 51 years old. I mean, where was the seed of this idea born? I think of the word humanities as a very academic word.
Yeah.
How do you kind of bridge this experience? Library, I don't think of as an academic word, oddly enough, but how do you bridge that experience of people's everyday, the mundane, everyday work that people do? And what's the seed of this project?
Sure, yeah. You know, we're the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, which you may have been following in the news lately. It's been having a little bit of trouble.
Yep.
But the National Endowment for the Humanities was created as part of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society initiatives in the 1960s. So in about 1965, NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, and NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, were created. And beginning in the very early 1970s, NEH began to accredit state humanities councils. And there are now 56 of them, all 50 states plus the 6 jurisdictions, Guam, the Virgin Islands, the Northern Marianas, and so on, Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C. And those humanities councils, including Vermont, are charged with providing public humanities programming that meets the needs of their particular state. And so it can look pretty different from state to state because our states are different.
Yeah, amazing.
But we frequently do have in common that we do a lot of work with libraries, that we do a lot of work around books and around literature. There is a list of the academic disciplines that you might frequently think of as the humanities, right? As philosophy and history and religion and literature and those kinds of things. In the public humanities, we prefer to not really think about it that way. we really think about it as people sitting around a table talking about what it means to be human and how we engage with one another. We look at it through those lenses, right? History is very important. Many of our Vermont Reads books are books that are somehow nonfiction history books, like March, John Lewis's book, Bread and Roses 2, about the Lawrence textile mills strikes. But we don't necessarily think about it in terms of the academic disciplines.
Yeah.
We've had this relationship with NEH for 51 years now, since we began on January 1st, 1974, until just this spring, when all grants from the NEH to not just humanities councils, but all grantees around the country were terminated.
Yeah. Well, we're getting into that now. So the federal impacts, and maybe before we get into the federal impacts, just tell us how Vermont Humanities is supported. How do you exist, and what's the nature of your staff?
Sure. Yeah, we're very, very lucky here in that very early on, Vermonters began supporting Vermont Humanities with individual gifts. And so we have, hundreds and hundreds of people who will send in a small check or a big check every year to support our programming. And that's just been true for decades and decades. And I'm really grateful to the previous directors and their staff, as well as the work of literally hundreds of board members over decades that helped make that possible. So when we bring it up to the present moment, Vermont Humanities is supported by individual donors, by the state of Vermont through an appropriation by the legislature every year, and by the National Endowment for the Humanities up until April 2nd. The National Endowment for the Humanities was our largest funding source, but only around 40%. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money, and it's hard to get over.
Yeah.
But it is less existential than maybe it is in some places, at least in part because Vermonters really care about the work we do, and they have stepped up in a big way.
Yeah.
They have not been able to replace all of that lost federal funding, but nor should they be asked to. Part of the reason why the National Endowment for the Humanities exists is so that we all collectively contribute to arts and culture and humanities in our society.
Yeah.
That funding is our money, it's your money, it's my money that we pay in our taxes, and then comes back to support making our community a safe and healthy place.
Yeah. And certainly NEH and NEA have been politicized for decades. But this year we had a huge hit when what we know of as DOGE came in and, as you said, cut funding to all the humanities councils around the state, but also grants that were direct to community organizations. The Fletcher Free Library was one of those. CCTV was one of those. Other folks who had direct grants from the NEH had those grants terminated. Talk to us a little bit about that impact of that federal funding loss, the 40% for you, but also do you have a sense of that around the country?
Yeah, I mean, it is terrible all over the United States to watch the impacts. And I would say, talking to my colleagues at councils around the country, virtually everyone has had to pause or cancel programming, and almost all councils, I think, have had to lay off staff. Here in Vermont, we made an early decision to reduce our full-time staff from 10 people to 7. We had 1 unfilled position, and then we unfortunately said goodbye to 2 really devoted and very talented staff people because we just did not have the resources. I think it has hit very hard in lots of places, and some places much harder than here. And I talk with my colleagues around the country every day about what that is like, and we have advocacy working groups that are working to try and kind of revive the NEH if we can in the future. I think all of us agree that the loss of the finances is terrible, but the loss of that commitment, that democratic commitment to arts, culture, and humanities is even worse, and that's what's worth fighting for.
And the NEH itself cut half of its program staff.
More than
Correct?
half.
More than half of
More
its
than
program
half.
staff, besides
Yeah.
freezing all of these funds.
Yeah.
Which, and I'm not expecting you to know this number, even though I'm going to ask, do we know the sort of total outlay of funding that this is supposed to save?
Sure, yeah, almost nothing.
Yeah.
Right. So Doge makes a claim, right, that they are saving taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
And the total budget for the NEH for this fiscal year was $207 million.
Yeah.
Which is basically a
Yeah.
rounding error.
Which may sound like a lot to folks, but when you take that and you spread that across the entire
Right.
country,
It's very,
and
very
then
tiny.
to beyond state projects, individual projects as well.
Yeah.
207 million.
207 million. And for the councils, for the 56 councils, is much less, right? It's
Yep.
65 million. About a third of the NEH budget goes to the state councils every year.
Yeah. So this is not really about a funding save. It's more of like an existential understanding of what we're supporting as a country.
Yeah. To me, it's clearly not saving money.
Yeah.
What it's doing is sending a message
Yeah.
about the way we want democracy to work
Yeah.
or not work.
And I think it's important, maybe back to that thing about how you serve the community at large. Vermont Humanities is a non-political organization. You're nonpartisan,
Correct.
and you're not political in that sense that you're serving all Vermonters. Can you just talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's 100% true for all 56 councils, right? That all of us are nonpartisan organizations. None of us are political organizations. We are all charged by the NEH with providing public humanities programming, and it meets the needs of our state. And in Vermont, we're very concerned about flooding, so we want to provide programming about understanding how our communities can be more resilient. Last year, as we talked about earlier, we really wanted to talk about the crisis around opioids, so we
Yeah.
picked a book that was about that. We also knew, for example, that there was this whole crew of neighbors that are living and working and keeping our dairy industry alive that most Vermonters know nothing about. And so we wanted to spend some time helping Vermonters understand how the dairy industry operates in Vermont. And that year was 2022.
Yeah.
Right, so that's how we do that work, and none of that work is political.
So what has been the pushback on these federal funding cuts?
Sure.
And when we say federal funding, it's really specific folks out of the agency known as DOGE who went in, terminated all grants, sent letters. What's been some of the pushback?
Sure, yeah. Well, we're lucky to have a national membership organization called the Federation of State Humanities Councils, very exciting name, who worked with Oregon Humanities to file a lawsuit in federal district court challenging the cancellation of the grants for the councils. And it's exciting that we actually got a preliminary injunction saying that what DOGE tried to do was wrong. And what that does is it doesn't give us our money back, unfortunately, but it does direct NEH to not spend those dollars on anything else while the trial moves forward. And of course, as everybody knows, courts are notoriously slow, and they're going to take a long time to sort of figure this out. But it is great to have that first decision saying, nope, you guys were right, this was wrong. DOGE does not have the power to do this.
Yeah.
And you are likely to win.
DOGE doesn't have the power to unilaterally cancel all grants.
Unilaterally cancel all
across-
grants.
yeah.
There is a process, of course, as there is with
Yeah.
any federal grant to
Yeah.
cancel a grant,
Yeah.
but they did not follow the process.
Yeah.
So we're grateful for the Federation taking that forward, and we'll see where that goes.
So, the impact of what you do in Vermont Humanities, you've talked about a little bit. How do people, where do people fit in this work? They can pick up the Vermont Reads program, they can attend the museum in your community, Main Street Museum.
Yep, Museum on Main Street.
Museum on Main Street. What are other ways that folks can get involved?
Sure. Well, participating in Vermont Reads is one. Going to a program is certainly another. There's lots of different ways to get involved. We have a wonderful sort of side project that we've been doing now around democracy. In Vermont, we produced with the Center for Cartoon Studies the Freedom and Unity comic book. It's being distributed all over the state. There's a new version for younger kids coming out probably this week that's more focused on the State House. People can get copies of that and distribute it in their community, have discussions around it. When your kids go and do their field trip to the State House now, I think most fifth graders go, they're going to get a copy of the younger age version of that. And of course, I'm always looking for people who might be interested in applying for grants from us. If you're running a community project that feels like a humanities project, it probably is, and you should probably go to our webpage, vermonthumanities.org, and check out our grant opportunities. There's rapid response grants for events that are happening in the next couple months. There's project grants for things with a little bit of a further timeline. And other opportunities. So check that out. Yeah. I would also say that it is really important for people right now to go to arts, culture, and humanities programming, not just ours, right? Like, I love what we do, but there are literally hundreds of arts and culture organizations in Vermont, and they all need support right now. So if you're in Burlington, go to something that the Flynn is producing. If you are in Rutland, go to something that the Paramount is doing. If you don't have a library card, go and get one and go to a program, because they have tons of amazing things happening. Some of it might be connected to us, but a lot of it is stuff that local communities are doing on their own. Go to it.
I mean, that's so interesting, and we're going to wrap up soon, but what is your sort of existential feeling about the online world, social media in relationship to humanities? And are you thinking about that in terms of where you're going as an organization?
Sure.
Because it's true, it feels like people are they don't want to meet each other in person as much. And, maybe I'm making that up, but talk a little bit about that.
I think that, of course, comes out of the pandemic, right? That sense that we don't want to be out in community with one another. And I think that is undeniably true, that we are struggling with that right now in communities large and small, all over the country. And I think there are also signs of hope that people are coming back out, and that they're able to merge the kind of virtual experience with the actual experience. So, Vermont Humanities did a lot of online work, largely through the public access stations during 2020, 2021, during the depth of the pandemic. We haven't stopped doing the online work. We could have said, we just want people to come to the library now. But we didn't do that, because we know that the virtual work expands universal access. And that is really key. So for people, for whatever reason, maybe you don't drive at night, maybe you have a mobility issue, maybe you're just like busy and tired at the end of the day and you'd rather watch a recording, all of that is totally valid. And so we have to be walking both paths. We have to be providing that universal access, and we have to be providing ways for people to gather in person.
All on a diminished budget.
All on a diminished budget, right.
But not to end on a negative note. It sounds amazing. Right. It sounds interesting. Yeah. Again, this year's Vermont Reads book, Light Pirate by Lily Brooks Dalton. And is there a project launch for that, or has that launched already? It
started on July 1st, so we're about 3 months in, and there's already... That's not too late. We'll go all the way through next June 30th. Right now, there's 54 different community projects happening.
Wow.
We've given away almost 2,000 books.
Wow.
So please sign right up. More to go. And Lily is a Vermonter. She grew up in Windham County, and she'll be here in the spring as part of Teen Lit Mob, which is the youth literary festival.
Great. Sounds like so much. Christopher Kaufman Ilstrup, Executive Director of Vermont Humanities. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for watching, and be well.